There are seasons in life when nothing seems to move, no matter how hard you try. You wake up each day doing the same things, watering the same hopes, waiting for change that never comes. And slowly, impatience begins to whisper that you are wasting your time. But what if stillness is not punishment? What if waiting is not weakness? What if the quiet moments are where true strength is being built? This is a story about patience. Not the kind that waits helplessly, but the kind that works silently while the world rushes ahead. A story about motivation born from discipline, healing that comes from letting go, and purpose that reveals itself only with time. In a quiet farming town where the land measured life in seasons instead of seconds, there lived a farmer who believed effort should always bring immediate reward. His journey would teach him otherwise, and perhaps remind you of something you've forgotten too. In a quiet farming town where mornings arrived softly and evenings left without ceremony, there lived a farmer named Elias. His land stretched wider than his house, but narrower than his patience. Every day before the sun lifted its head, Elias was already awake. Boots on, hands rough, mind busy with numbers and outcomes. He believed in effort, in showing up, in doing more than was required. To him, motivation meant movement, and strength meant pushing forward no matter how heavy the days felt. He had learned early in life that nothing was given freely. If you wanted something to grow, you worked for it. If you wanted purpose, you earned it with discipline. That belief had carried him far, or at least far enough to survive. Yet lately, something felt wrong. The fields looked the same no matter how much care he poured into them. The soil drank the water, the seeds disappeared beneath the earth, and time passed without visible reward. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, and the silence of waiting began to weigh on him. Elias would stand at the edge of his land in the evenings, staring across rows of dirt that offered no answers. He told himself to be patient, but patience felt like standing still while the world moved on without you. It felt like wasted energy, like weakness dressed up as virtue. Inside him lived a quiet fear that maybe he was falling behind, that others were harvesting while he was still preparing, that effort without results meant failure. He worked harder to silence that fear. Longer hours, fewer breaks, more control. He measured his days by sweat and exhaustion, believing that if he gave enough, the land would eventually respond. But the land did not rush. It did not explain itself. It simply waited. And in that waiting, Elias felt something unfamiliar creeping into his chest. Not laziness, not doubt, but impatience disguised as urgency, a pressure to force outcomes before they were ready, a need to prove that his journey was not being wasted. What Elias didn't yet understand was this: the land was already teaching him, not about farming, but about life, and like most lessons that truly matter, it would not arrive quickly. As weeks passed, the land began to respond, slowly, almost reluctantly. Tiny green shoots broke through the soil, barely noticeable unless you were looking closely. Elias noticed everything. Each morning he walked the fields with sharper steps, his eyes scanning for proof that his effort mattered. And there it was. Growth. Not dramatic, not impressive, but real. Those small signs awakened something powerful inside him. A quiet pride, a sense of validation. The land hadn't ignored him after all. It had simply been moving at its own pace. Elias straightened his shoulders and breathed easier. His discipline was working. His patience, though forced, was paying off. He doubled down. He woke earlier, stayed longer, refined his routines, measured rainfall, tracked soil, adjusted every variable he could touch. He felt strong again, motivated by the idea that control, when paired with effort, could shape outcomes. Each new leaf felt like a reward. Each inch of growth felt like proof that struggle was temporary. People in town began to notice. They praised his work ethic, admired his consistency. Some even asked for advice. Elias listened politely, but inside, he felt something else rising. Confidence edged with certainty. He believed he had cracked the code. Discipline plus persistence equaled success. Yet beneath that confidence lived a subtle flaw. He began to expect progress on his timeline. If the plants grew one week, he expected them to grow faster the next. If yesterday brought hope, today should bring more. The waiting that once felt heavy now felt unnecessary. After all, hadn't he earned results? When growth slowed, as it always does, irritation crept back in. Elias responded the only way he knew how: more effort, more control, more pressure. He pushed the land as if it were a machine, not a living thing. Still, the fields looked promising, full of potential, alive. From the outside, Elias appeared to be winning. His journey looked steady. His purpose seemed clear. Strength radiated from routine, and motivation flowed from visible progress. But nature was quiet, too quiet. And beneath the surface, forces beyond Elias's discipline were already gathering, unseen, unannounced, and indifferent to how hard he worked. The rise had begun, but it was not the whole story. The storm arrived without ceremony. One evening, the sky darkened faster than expected, the clouds thick and low, heavy with something Elias couldn't name. He stood at his doorway, watching the wind bend the young crops in uneasy waves. He told himself it would pass. Storms always did. This one did not. Rain fell hard and unrelenting, turning soil into mud, hope into helplessness. By morning, the fields were unrecognizable. Water pooled where roots once held firm. Stalks lay broken, pressed into the earth they had struggled to escape. Elias walked the land in silence. Every step sank deeper than the last. The careful routines, the early mornings, the discipline he had trusted, none of it mattered now. Nature had rewritten everything overnight. Months of effort dissolved into a single, merciless season. Something broke inside him. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. He felt foolish for believing effort guaranteed reward, angry for trusting patience, ashamed for not seeing this coming. His motivation, once fueled by progress, now burned with resentment. The land felt like a betrayal, cold, indifferent, unfair. People from town came by, offering sympathy, advice, explanations. Elias barely heard them. Their words floated past him, weightless and useless. Nothing they said could give back what had been taken. At night, sleep avoided him. His mind replayed every decision, every choice he might have made differently. If only he had planted later. If only he had protected the fields more. If only he had worked harder. Failure wrapped itself around his identity. He no longer saw a farmer when he looked in the mirror. He saw a man who had misjudged time, trusted too much, and lost anyway. The future felt fragile now, uncertain, uninviting. And beneath the grief lived something darker. Fear. Fear that this loss was not temporary. Fear that his journey had reached its end. Fear that patience had been a lie. Standing in the ruined fields, Elias clenched his fists and stared at the sky, not for rain, not for mercy, but for an explanation. None came, because the fall does not explain itself. It simply asks one question: what will you do when effort is no longer enough? Elias did not leave the fields. Days after the storm, when others returned to their routines, he stayed. He rose before dawn and walked the land as if something might change if he arrived early enough. The soil was still heavy, the air still damp, but he worked anyway, pulling, digging, pressing seeds into ground that no longer promised anything. He told himself this was discipline, that strength meant refusing to stop, that quitting would be the real failure. But beneath the movement, nothing was moving. He could not accept what had happened. Loss felt temporary in his mind, something that could be undone with enough effort. So he pushed harder. He worked through pain in his hands, through exhaustion in his chest, through the quiet voice inside that begged him to pause. The land gave him no response. Days blurred together, meals were skipped, sleep came in fragments. Elias lived inside repetition, repeating the same motions, the same thoughts, the same questions that had no answers. Guilt settled into his bones. Guilt for trusting the season, for believing patience would protect him, for not being better prepared. He avoided the town now. Conversations felt dangerous. Every sympathetic look felt like a reminder of who he used to be. A man with promise. A man with purpose. At night he sat alone, staring at hands that no longer felt strong. He replayed the rise, the fall, the moment everything slipped beyond his control. Letting go felt impossible. If he released the past, what would remain of him? So he clung to it. He treated the land as if it owed him something, as if force could replace timing, as if discipline alone could reverse loss. But discipline without acceptance is just punishment, and Elias was punishing himself without realizing it. Stillness terrified him, because in stillness he might have to feel the grief. In silence he might have to admit the truth, that this season was over. Denial does not scream. It keeps you busy. And as Elias worked the unresponsive soil under a sky that offered no signs, he did not notice how deeply stuck he had become. Not in failure, but in the refusal to move forward. One late afternoon, as the light softened and the heat finally loosened its grip, Elias noticed someone standing at the edge of his land. The man was old. Older than the fields themselves seemed to remember. He leaned on a wooden staff, his posture relaxed, his gaze calm. He wasn't watching the crops. He was watching Elias. Instinctively, Elias felt irritation rise. Advice was the last thing he wanted, sympathy even less. He kept working, pretending not to notice. The man spoke anyway. "You've been here a long time," he said, his voice steady, unhurried. "Longer than the land needs." Elias paused but didn't turn. "Work doesn't stop just because the season was cruel," he replied. The man smiled gently. "No," he said, "but suffering does." That caught Elias off guard. Finally, he faced him. "If you know something I don't," Elias said, "you can say it. Otherwise, let me work." The old man stepped closer, tapping his staff into the soil. "You're treating the earth like it's late," he said. "But the earth is never late." Silence stretched between them. "You planted with discipline," the man continued. "You worked with courage. But now you're fighting time itself, and time always wins." Elias felt something tighten in his chest. "So what?" he snapped. "I'm supposed to stop caring." The man shook his head. "No, you're supposed to stop clinging." He knelt, scooping a handful of soil and letting it fall through his fingers. "Nothing grows when you squeeze it too hard," he said quietly. Those words landed differently, not sharp, not demanding, just true. Before Elias could respond, the man stood and turned away. "Rest the land," he said over his shoulder. "And while you're at it, rest yourself." Then he walked on, leaving no name, no explanation, no instruction, only a thought that lingered longer than Elias wanted it to. That evening, for the first time since the storm, Elias did not return to the fields after sunset. The encounter did not change everything, but it cracked something open. And sometimes, that is enough. The next morning felt unfamiliar. Elias woke at his usual hour, but for the first time in weeks he didn't rush for his boots. He sat at the edge of his bed, listening to the quiet of the house, the steady rhythm of his own breath. The words from the old man returned, not as commands, but as questions. What if the land isn't late? What if you are? He walked the fields more slowly that day. Not to fix them, not to force anything, just to see. The soil was still tired, the plants still weak. But for the first time, Elias noticed what he had ignored before, the damage his impatience had added. The earth was compacted, overworked, stripped of rest. So he stopped. Not completely, just enough. He set down his tools earlier than usual, left sections of the land untouched. It felt wrong at first, like abandoning responsibility. Discipline had always meant doing more. Now it meant doing less, and that took a different kind of strength. At night, Elias slept longer. The guilt still surfaced, but it no longer ruled him. He began to understand that healing was not about undoing failure. It was about accepting it without letting it define him. Days passed, then weeks. The land rested. So did he. In that space, something quiet returned. Purpose, not driven by urgency, but guided by trust. Motivation no longer screamed, it whispered. It reminded him that growth was a journey, not a demand. One morning, while walking the fields, Elias noticed small signs of life. Subtle, almost invisible. Not the same crops, not the same plants, but something new, emerging where the soil had been left alone. He didn't celebrate. He didn't rush. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging an old truth he was finally ready to live by. Rebirth does not announce itself. It begins in silence. And in that silence, Elias felt peace for the first time. Not because everything was fixed, but because he no longer needed it to be. The new season arrived quietly. No storms, no urgency. Just mornings that unfolded without resistance. Elias noticed it first in himself. He no longer woke with a knot in his chest or a list of demands in his mind. His days began with intention, not pressure. The land responded in its own time. Green returned, not all at once, not where he expected, but enough to remind him that life never truly stops. It simply waits for the right conditions. Elias worked again, but differently now. He listened more, rested when the soil asked for it, trusted what he could not control. Strength felt different. It wasn't loud. It didn't prove itself. It endured. Neighbors still passed by, some curious, some surprised. Elias no longer measured himself against their progress. Comparison had lost its grip. His purpose was no longer borrowed from outcomes. It lived in the care he gave, the patience he practiced, the discipline he balanced with mercy. He understood now that failure had not come to break him. It had come to slow him down. In the evenings, Elias would sit on the porch, watching the light fade over the fields. The same fields that once felt like a burden now felt like companions. They had suffered together. rested together. He had stopped demanding immediate answers from life and started honoring the journey instead. Peace settled in, not as an emotion, but as a way of being. There were still hard days, still uncertainty, still moments when impatience whispered again, but Elias knew how to meet them now, not with force, with trust. And when the harvest finally came, it was not the abundance he once dreamed of, but it was enough, enough to sustain him. Enough to remind him that growth measured slowly often lasts the longest. Elias smiled more these days, not because everything was perfect, but because he had learned how to move with time instead of against it. The dawn did not promise ease, it promised balance, and in that balance, Elias found something greater than success. He found himself. And so the farmer's story becomes more than his own, because somewhere in your life you have stood in a season like Elias did, working hard, doing everything right, and still watching things fall apart. You have questioned your discipline, doubted your purpose, and wondered whether patience was just another word people use to explain delay. But here is what this journey quietly teaches. Patience is not inaction. It is disciplined trust in timing you cannot control. Failure is not the opposite of strength. Often it is the doorway to deeper strength. Healing begins when you stop punishing yourself for what you couldn't prevent. Letting go does not mean giving up. It means releasing what no longer grows. True motivation is calm, not desperate. It moves steadily, even in silence. Purpose is not proven by speed, but by consistency over time. Rebirth rarely arrives loudly. It comes when you finally allow rest. Like the land, you are not late. Like the seasons, your journey is unfolding exactly as it should. If today feels slow, trust it. If progress feels invisible, honor it. If you are tired, rest without guilt. Because the quiet strength of patience is this: it builds a life that lasts. And if this story gave you even a moment of peace, take it with you. Share it with someone who's still waiting. And when you're ready, continue the journey with us. The field will bloom. So will you.